Hi, everyone. If you're comfortable turning on your video, please feel free. If you're not, or you're worried about bandwidth, I totally understand. But maybe if you want to do a quick flash of the video for everyone, that would be nice. And then if we need to turn some of them off, I totally understand. So welcome. I think the first minute or two, we might have some people moving in and out, but I think we've got a great group here, so I'm really excited. I'll just introduce myself really briefly again. Ingrid Orvedal, I'm coming over from RTI, a senior learning advisor. I work mainly with our lead division, which is learning, energy, and environment for development, but I'm lucky enough to get to work with a cross company group on these kinds of topics, as well as work with a few projects in our food and agriculture division and global health division. So I get to see kind of a wide breadth of technical topics, which is really exciting. I thought it would be fun to just go around and do like a quick intro and just say your name and maybe a little bit about what organization you come from, and then maybe just where you're sitting today in the world in this virtual scenario. I know, like, I was just up in Massachusetts, but I live in DC. So today I'm in DC in my little office, listening to people use the nail gun at the construction across the alley. So if people just want to go around and give a quick intro, and then we'll dig right in.
Hello, my name is Martin
Hi,
Kende.
Martin, go right ahead.
Yeah, my name is Martin Kende. I'm from DR Congo, and in Congo, I'm a lecturer at Kinshasa University, and right now I live in Maine, and I work for Happy Haven. I'm a program supervisor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone I want to jump in and go next?
I can go.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Pascal, and I'm from Chemonix, and I work closely with Barbara on the knowledge management end. So I'm in DC currently, and it's a pleasure being here. Thanks.
Thank you.
I can go next. Peter Hobby. And hello to all the familiar faces. I'm Knowledge and Learning Manager for the Famine Early Warning System Network project. And we are now structured in such a way that your challenge, Ingrid, of reaching across projects resonated. We're now in what they call an IDIQ structure. So I'm responsible for knowledge and learning for the whole project, but I have partners, Chemonix, for instance, that I need to integrate with. And we've started talking about this idea of a learning agenda, but it's just idea. And we are trying to encourage a culture of learning, but in a highly technical, quasi-competitive, sort of bureaucratic scenario. So I'm sitting in my son's old bedroom here in Bethesda and looking both to learn and commiserate a little bit on some of this challenge.
Great, thank you. Who wants to go next? Lane, I saw you on mute. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, hi, I'm Lane Pollock. I'm one of the co-chairs, but only newly so, for this working group for SID Washington. So thanks again for being here. My current role, I'm with PPL. I'm a senior learning advisor. And so I do a variety of things trying to help USAID be more flexible and agile and do more CLA things and learning, working with missions in particular, also with bureaus. I do want to note that prior to joining AID almost 10 years ago, which is scary, I was the head of programs for a very small nonprofit. So the kind of project to project, onboarding, offboarding, like that whole thing has always been of tremendous interest to me because it's so hard. And then within USAID, I'm trying to help missions do that better too, and try to retain some of that from one project to another or as staff come in and out. So I'm really excited about this topic. I am currently in Rockville, Maryland, just outside of DC, and I'm looking out the window and it is beautiful. So I'm also really thankful to anyone in the Washington area who's sitting online looking at a computer screen because it's a fantastic day and I'm thankful for that. So right after this, I'm going out.
Definitely, I'm right with you. I think we have one more, and then we have our SID kind of note taker listener. So Caitlin, are you able to unmute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not on video. I'm currently doing schooling for my child plus working. So my name is Caitlin Deering Scott. I'm a senior manager with the Center for Global Impact at the International Republican Institute. And the Center for Global Impact is where IRI houses all of its cross-cutting and thematic programming, and also supports cross-cutting initiatives in our regional programming. And as such, we play a crucial role in IRI's internal knowledge management, but I'm very new to this specific role, having come from a regional division. So I'm very eager to learn from experts like all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. We have a great group. I loved hearing some of your reasons for being in this group, commiserating with me on these challenges. I'm going to share my screen just to give us a few more details to work with in terms of the scenario that I'm kind of bringing to the table to spark our discussion. Sorry, my computer has decided to freeze for a moment. Okay. Okay, sorry about this. Always a challenge with the multiple screens and trying to share. Here we go. So just a few more details to give you a little bit more color to the picture. So this is a global health program, a global public health program, I should say, implemented in 13 countries. They're grouped into 4 buckets based on their location. There's a lot of overlap in terms of like what they're implementing, but there's still a lot of differentiation within that. And because it's particular public health sector, there are lots of global best practices that have to be followed. And so those are some kind of guardrails around what can be done. At the program level, the team developed a learning agenda about a year and a half ago. And it was meant to be holistic and like apply to every country program and allow some flexibility so that these individual country programs could identify, themes or sub-questions that were relevant to them, to their programming specifically. In addition to that, as part of the kind of rollout process, staff identified what we called learning activities, but things that were already part of the work plan or required only like a small addition or tweak to keep the budget really low or even non-existent because the budget was already really tight and LOE for individual staff was already really tight. So that's kind of like where we started. And I think the biggest challenge has been trying to fit the framework and make it relevant, as I said in my little intro, to those individual 13 countries and get those country programs and the staff that work on those programs to see why this learning agenda was important for them and why kind of sharing the things that they learned from their programming beyond just their team or even beyond just their bucket, as they call them. And that itself has been a serious challenge. So I'll stop there with my kind of the basic info. And so we're going to pick 2 phases to think about. And in the intro, they mentioned we've got our identify and collect. We've got our kind of shape, document, write up, and then we've got share and use. So I'm going to try to use the whiteboard in here, which is kind of fun. And I'm going to write. So we're going to decide which ones we want to tackle. So if we want to look at identify, I could spell, that would be helpful. Identify, collect. So think a minute about this while I write these down, and you can use your annotate function, or you can just yell it out since we're a small group. And we can just decide which one is kind of the first topic we want to talk about, and then which is the second, and we will not get to talk about all three, unfortunately. So you're welcome to pick two if you want to annotate, or if you just want to yell out the one that most interests you. So starting out, we need to identify and collect the learning, the lessons. Then we have to figure out what's the best way to put it down on paper so that we can share it. And then how do we make sure that it's usable, and how do we ensure that it gets to the right people? So those are kind of three somewhat distinct phases, though obviously there is some overlap. So yeah, anybody feeling really strongly about looking at one of these versus another?
Yeah, for me, the first one, identify and correct. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else feeling strongly? I'll go ahead and annotate it for you.
Yeah, I confess I can't figure out how to annotate.
No problem. I got you.
Small issue on my part. I'm curious about shape and document.
Okay.
We have lots of documentation to get through ourselves. So.
Anybody else feeling strongly about one of these three or two of these three?
Yeah, and also I want to add share and use. Yeah.
Okay, we need a tiebreaker.
It's a cycle. They're also interrelated, right? This is what you're talking about for the session.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all important for sure.
But I like your point, Ingrid, and this one is very familiar to me around what is the motivation for people who are generating lessons learned for somebody else? And at some point they are the somebody else, but how do you kind of connect those dots? Because it really, to Martin's point, it really does speak to like, that's hopefully people can imagine themselves as being their own client.
Yeah.
But we currently struggling with this on a couple of projects as well.
I think that's a great point. And I just realized that we forgot to name a person who would report out. And I don't want to get into the meat of this before someone raises their hand to do that. Who would be willing to, when we come back together, share kind of our key messages?
It can't be me because I'm the one interviewing the person reporting out.
Okay, you're off the hook.
Yeah.
I guess I can.
Okay, thanks.
You're good. Just to keep things moving.
I appreciate it.
But make
Thank
sure
you.
I have the right words in my mouth so I don't
We can do a quick,
go off and extemporize or whatever.
we can also do a quick wrap up as a group, maybe the last 5 minutes or so, and just kind of make sure we have a good sense of what some of the key takeaways that others have as well as you, so that you don't end up feeling like you're kind of ad-libbing too much.
And the upside is they're recording the session, so pressure's even lower.
It's all in there somewhere, right? But then it's a retrieval problem, which we don't want to inflict on people if we can help. So
I'm going to write what you just said, Lane, because I think for me, this is one of the biggest questions that I've had, and I hear is like, why am I doing this extra work for someone else? I can't see far enough ahead to know that, or to really grasp that I will be the someone else one day. I think right now there's a disconnect, at least with the project team that I'm working with. And I know we haven't decided which phases we're going to do, but I didn't want to lose this.
well, can I ask also though, I mean, small thing maybe, but sort of creative self-interest about your initial motivations to document just for yourself? I mean, I find we don't even get that far sometimes. People just keep churning ahead and they don't really reflect, period, even on their own immediate activities out of their own self-preservation. So for me, where I currently am with my project, some of it is getting that to happen first, and then we'll get to the whole issue of telling anybody else about it.
Okay, I like that. And I wonder if we're already kind of saying like we've said that this identify and collect is one of our key things. We've just brought up two good points, I think, related to how do you how do you move forward with that identify and collect piece when you're not sure what the motivation is or what the why.
Yep.
I think that's a good point too, Peter, because research has shown that we're actually more productive as individuals if we reflect and learn, right, and then go forward, as opposed to filling the same amount of time with continuing to complete tasks. So I think that's also a great point, just like there should be some sort of, I want myself to be more productive. So.
Yeah, we're currently trying to take a sort of agile process to developing applications and broaden that out to doing the rest of the work on the project, so that, you know, shorter time delimited sprints, as we call them on the IT side, are just, you know, time frames, and then more modest expectations, but so you can check things off as you go forward. And it's not directly related to this, but it's helped us focus on specifics that we can accomplish instead of spinning too much on big picture issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you know, hearing that, I feel like that is a really relevant point when you think about this particular scenario, right? And it sounds like you have a similar situation where you are trying to put like a process in place, but it doesn't trickle down to the individuals that are actually the ones that need to capture the information. And so trying to say that we're doing this all the time and this is always part of your, you know, your workload now, rather than what you're suggesting and doing like maybe these kind of chunks of time where this is a different expectation, could be a cool way to kind of not disrupt people's maybe normal workflow, but still allow people to have this reflection time and kind of move some of this information out to others, as well as for themselves, but like kind of shake it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a very great point. I was also thinking that sometimes in organizations we feel so overwhelmed by the number of processes that's when once you mention something, they're like, oh my God, like that's an additional work. And so how do we, right from the initial phase, how do we embed this idea of like capturing these learnings right from the state, right from like, how do we embed it in every process so that it doesn't just seem like, okay, at the end of a project, like we're doing this big learning thing, but then do it experiential in a way that it's like continuous and it becomes like a culture, like an organization culture in a way. I think that's also like just something to also keep note of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And how do you do that once things are already being implemented, right? Maybe that's possible if you're getting in at the ground floor with like, I'm hiring 3 new people and this is part of their job description, versus I'm coming into a project that's been going for a year and these staff are just rolling with their implementation. They've been doing the same thing for a year. And maybe for some people, you know, a lot of this programming, it's like, it's actually the same people for 10 or 15 years, even if the implementer has changed, you know, especially at the more local level, it's a lot of the same people. And so to then suggest a change, like, I guess that to me seems like a pretty big challenge. How would you like start small with that and get bigger, or kind of chip away at it? Seems like a big question to me.
Like for me, I think I've been with Chemonics slightly almost a year, and like it's really hard for me to know where to go for like certain information, because like most of the people in the document, they've either like left the company or like being moved to another, and so the information is there, but then it's just hard to like know where to go to get it. And so I feel like if you're like deliberately capturing this, like just establishing a process right across the company in a way that like you learn on the go and there's a system that captures that as you go along. I know it's not as easy as I would say, but then I feel like that can really help.
Mhm.
Have you found actually this, I have a very like this much understanding of how Chemonics is operating on the inside. Barbara and I have worked together way in the past. And she was, I think, working on Yammer as a place for conversations.
Mhm.
Have you found that mining past conversations essentially is helpful? Or is, I don't even know if that's an option. Because I'm always curious about the connecting with people and the flow of information, not just the final output as a document.
Mining past conversation in terms of the email. I don't, so the Yammer thing is new. The Yammer platform is new, which we just launched relaunched in January. And so it's picking up and people are really seeing value in it, especially considering the fact that you can go there and kind of search for like keywords, discussion around it, and then follow up. But still we realize that now the confusion is, when do I use Teams and when do I use Yammer? And so in as much as you want to introduce more tools, you're also careful that you don't want to confuse the process, because people will be like, oh my God, like too much tools, I'm just tired. And then that might create another problem. And so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, all good.
But
I
it's
hear
coming
you.
up. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm familiar with it, at least, or I remember hearing about a case about a year ago about some implementers in the field using WhatsApp and mining WhatsApp messages, and their field staff were tied together through WhatsApp, and they would do a qualitative analysis process for the WhatsApp messages as a way of tagging some key learning, and particularly in an effort to get kind of as close to that field level as possible. I thought that was fascinating. At the time, I didn't know how to use WhatsApp, and so my colleagues laughed at me as I downloaded it. I started to use it. To your point, Pascal, like trying to figure out how to use all these different tools in the appropriate way. The other thing, your comment a minute ago prompted for me, Pascal, is like to think about what are the kind of fit for purpose learning things we can do. Like sometimes recently I facilitated an after action review for a mission, and they were like, whoa, this is amazing. And I'm like, it was just for us, I think, who work in this field, it was really not that big of a deal, but it forced them to create this moment. And I will say, as much as people kind of ask or say, I don't have the time to do this, or I don't really get this, or whatever, most of the time, I don't know what your experiences are, but most of the time when I'm hosting or kind of doing a learning activity, so to speak, particularly if it's a facilitated discussion, people light up and they get like really jazzed and they're like, oh, that was great. We just needed more time. That's usually the feedback, which I think is very positive. But I think people do like to learn and have that moment. So when you have it, it's refreshing and energizing, but it's that process, as you said, Ingrid, of like the conversation around, well, why should I do this if there's some, abstract use, which I think also gets to the use connection. Like how is this going? My colleagues in PPL, that is always like their thing. I will only do this if you demonstrate to me how this will be used. So I appreciate that question.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I feel like we're kind of like we're just going around the cycle. We haven't necessarily like focused on one, but for me, it's also wrapped together that it's really hard to say that, oh, I'm just going to focus on how to get people to identify the lessons, or I'm just going to focus on how to get people to document it in the way that I think it needs to be documented. One big question that I'm just curious about, and I think it's kind of floating around the edges of what we're saying, is like, who decides or who gets to be involved, I guess, in any one of these phases when you're talking about a kind of global umbrella, and then these 13 or however many individual, whether they're activities or it's IDIQ, a structure. How is that determined, and how could that influence kind of uptake? I'm curious your experiences, or kind of what might have like risen up as we were talking.
Yeah, that's a really good question. From where I'm sitting, it's kind of It's a who needs to know what question. And there's some very immediate needs that say the IT people need in fixing code. And there are 2 or 3 of them that know this and care, chat, fix things, write it up, problem solved. They kind of remember where to go. The rest of us have no idea what just happened, but the system works. So we're okay with it. And so I'm always torn a little between the connecting people and the using stuff, or creating an artifact. And there's some sort of balance in there, I think, so that and this is really hard at the global scale, I think, where you need to invest a fair amount in documentation and more than people usually are comfortable with, but then also market it and make it accessible to people in bite-sized bits. It's maybe a little e-learning, or it's a guide, job aid kind of thing. So it's formatted for easy uptake. But that's much harder than having a conversation with a peer who gets it and already has half the solution in their head. So
I like how you just put those kind of on opposite sides, because I think that this is often the challenge, right? Like Lane was saying, a facilitated conversation is people are almost always gonna be like, oh, that was awesome. Now I'm gonna go do this. And, they leave feeling energized and refreshed perhaps, but that can't be all that's happening, because you need some of it to go beyond, right? Like, what if in a month somebody's dealing with the same situation and wasn't at that event or in that meeting? How are they going to know what are some of the options are, or hear about a failure or a success that they can then kind of wrap into what they're planning? And I think for me, that's the challenge. I think it can be relatively on the easier side to just say, like, okay, we're going to do quarterly learning events with teams in this structure and get people in a room and be like, that was awesome. Yes, we've got like these new things happening. But I think for me, the bigger question is like, what about that person a month later who missed out on that? And like, what are we losing or missing out on in a bigger way by those missed opportunities? And so, yeah, I think this is like the crux of the issue, really. So I'd love to hear any other thoughts, ideas, conundrums, kind of using that dichotomy.
I feel like sometimes also we, especially thinking about global offices operating in like multiple countries, there's this belief. I'm from Sierra Leone, and so like there's this belief that, oh my God, like those in the US or in the headquarters, they're like the experts. And so there's always like this sharp divide. And so I feel like we as like, especially working on this knowledge agenda, it's nice to just have that right at the start. That's a big barrier. And the earlier you start involving people from the field office, the better, or the stronger the sense of ownership that, okay, it's not her just pushing things throughout it, but this is our idea, because look, this person in Congo, this person in this country is like also there. And so they feel like they have like, it's more generalized in a way. And so I feel like having more field people engaged and maybe taking leadership and celebrating little success along the way, I feel like that can really create so much impact.
Yeah, Pascal, I agree with you, because sometimes when some team comes from Washington and they bring it directly to Africa, because I have been involved in a lot of projects in Africa, and people from Africa, especially me from Congo, so we are seeing that, oh, but those guys, they came from Washington, they don't know about our reality. They don't, they know nothing, They come just to implement, but it will not be a success. So the best things to do every time is to try first to involve the local people, create the sense of ownership. If you want to get a success in everything that you are doing, they must be fully involved and participate. Then after that, those from Washington will come to implement everything.
No, I think I've seen some of that. I used to work with Zachary actually back in the day in Bureau for Food Security when it was BFS. And I think there is this real tug of war of the headquarters at that time saw themselves as thought leaders, but they're working on a headquarters sort of high level mentality, and the field people know what's going on and getting the work done. And so there's a pride of place for headquarters, but they're almost, I don't want to say defensive, but there's an interesting psychology around expecting to be an expert and how you own that role. And sometimes it's more facilitative than it is directive, but that's tough for people with advanced degrees and big ideas, you know, but that's not what development's about in my book. So I love that. I think it's very important. It needs to be a shared effort for sure.
And I feel like it really has so much to play, especially with this learning agenda, because you're challenging some key assumptions, right? And so like thinking about the 13 countries that you're planning to like cover, I feel like many of the things will be like contested. And so it's just nice. The more you have like champions in these countries to kind of just promote the idea, the more it will be easier for the locals to kind of adopt and be like, oh, wait, this person that we look up to is really in full support of this. Like, obviously, I would definitely support the idea too.
Yeah, I like that idea of champions. It is something that we tried to like figure out how to do. We like I think we kind of half did it. And so it hasn't been as successful because unfortunately, those champions don't feel as bought into the framework as we thought they would. You know, I came in after the learning agenda had been developed, and so was only brought in to help with the rollout. And so I've learned a lot along the way of like some of the best practices for doing learning agendas, I think are around really getting everyone involved, making sure you vet and have those voices heard. And so that whatever you end up with is like, everyone can see themselves in it. And I think my scenario, this is an example where they did that with their donor, with their client, but they didn't do it with the individual country teams or at the more local level. And so I think that right is like there's a divide and it's really flaring up right now because they're like, we don't want to devote all of this time to doing something that we still don't really see the value in. We still think of this as your headquarters thing and we're doing the work for you. And so we've been really trying to flip the script on that. But it's a little hard to do it like later, right? Hopefully it would be easier if it was set up like that way from the beginning. But I think that gets back to one of the points that you made, Pascal, about like how you embed it from the beginning and how you can like, and I guess I'm just curious, like, what are ways to embed it after the fact? Like, what are some of the things you need to like go back and kind of redo? What are some things you could maybe like be like, okay, so we're starting from here and now we're doing this. And where do you have to just scrap it and start over? I mean, that's kind of my existential question with the team I'm working with. I'm like, how long are we going to struggle to get people to get on board with us before we maybe like start over with them more involved now that we've realized all these pitfalls? So I guess that's another question, a big one.
I just want to flag, I'm so sorry to interrupt really quickly. I just want to say, Ingrid, we have about 12 minutes.
Okay.
So, just to make sure we have time to get back.
So we can stop in like maybe
Or
8
10.
minutes and maybe do like a little
Thanks,
recap for Peter to report out. But this has been amazingly helpful and interesting, at least just to get the wheels spinning again. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla.
Peter, you were trying to say something.
Well, yeah, I'm sort of having a flashback as you were talking there. So let me hold on. Whoops, I knocked my own laptop. I was trying to think of facilitative ways to get people bought in. And I was reminded, I was part of the team that kicked off the knowledge management effort for the Youth Power Project. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but big project. And we were asked, and so kind of inflicted upon us, it wasn't a grassroots effort, to stand up communities of practice. And those are both wonderful and fraught experiences, as many of us know who've been involved. And I was tasked with setting up a workshop about, and one of the things was kicking off these sort of superimposed communities. But, being a good doobie, I said, okay, fine, let me figure out a way to make this happen. I looked at, I'm going to forget the name, but creative destruction was the exercise I pulled from one of the, what is it?
Liberating structures. People?
Yeah, thank you, Lane. Yep. And what we did is go around table by table and talk about how you could be sure that you wouldn't have this happen. How can you kneecap standing up a community and guarantee it won't happen in an abstract sort of way? And then discuss, but what are you currently doing, which is not terribly helpful? And how might we actually address some of this so you get a better return? And so things like that where, and I have it scribbled in my notes somewhere, but the challenging key assumptions idea, I think there should be a certain amount of, really, is this how it has to be if you want to get people bought in? So I'm also reminded of, it's something an old realtor friend told me. They don't like homeowners in the house when they're selling property because the realtors know somebody's engaged when they're busy dumping on something because they care. And so sometimes showing you care is by trying to pull it apart first before you engage. So I know, a bit of a monologue there, but some ideas on engagement maybe around new activities.
I really like that. I can see those conversations happening with some key people in my head right now. And I think they would see that some of the things they're doing are the reasons that this isn't working.
Well, we all got to own our role, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love it. I love liberating structures, like as a, just as a process tool, but I've never used this creative destruction one. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, and I think they call it TRIZ within the liberating structures thing, because I used it relatively recently in partnership with someone else. And it was great, Peter, as you're describing, because it's very energetic, right? To like trash it and just make it like the worst possible scenario can be actually hilarious and energizing. And then you step back and you say, oh my goodness, what of those things on the list? Look at those 10 things we're doing that are already, doing that. I love that tool too. Thank you for the reminder, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must have rebranded it in my own head. Yeah, I forget. That's what I called it for the session. So you're right.
Same idea.
What is it, Lane? What is the actual?
It's TRIZ, I think is how it's listed in their tools. Is that right, Pascal?
Cool.
I was recently looking at their list.
Cool.
But I love your question, Peter, of what's the facilitative process by which you can surface that ownership, and the idea of not assuming. That's also triggering for me. I happen to be faced with some communities of practice issues in my life, my professional life, that I'm being asked to kind of host and facilitate. So yeah, it's a great reminder.
Yeah, my feeling is you're not doing it right if it's not hard when it comes to communities.
Yeah.
They're never really, I mean, a few are natural, but so many take a bit of care and feeding. Yeah.
It's so true.
Mm-hmm. I would completely agree with you. Yeah, if they seem easy, you're probably not getting out of it what you could be, I guess is what I would say.
It's probably a mailing list.
And
you're disseminating information.
Yes, well said.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was also thinking maybe just presenting this learning agenda as kind of a living document. Like this is not just the end of it in a way. Like obviously this is a starting point to get the conversation going. And so the more because I'm thinking going back and maybe tearing it apart, and obviously that would be the process of like convincing them that whatever you think, like this is a starting point, read from it. What do you think you want to add for like the next version? It doesn't necessarily have to be like the next year, but then that can also help in adoption in a way. Like, okay, we have to start somewhere. This is here to how can we improve this, or how can we integrate this in the work that we're doing, or in helping resolve some of the problems that we're faced with. And then along the way, you can also encourage them to add their thoughts for like the next edition, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm just thinking it costs so much, like so much has gone into reaching this stage. And so, yeah, just presenting it as, okay, this is the starting point. Like, how can we leverage this? And then how can we get more inputs? How can we learn from it in a way? I don't know.
No, I like that. Thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes left. Is that right? Okay. So do we want to just talk about any kind of things that rise to the top here? Give Peter some notes to share out. I mean, I think this has all been so interesting, but I'd love to hear what kind of rises to the top for folks. Don't be shy. You haven't been shy this whole time. It's been such an engaged group. I feel really lucky.
Did we actually really just focus on the first, or we kind of ricocheted around about all of the above, kind of? Yeah.
Well, I think we ricocheted around, but I do think that we focused on like the trying to think how to say it, like we focused on the people, right? Like the people's perspective, right? Like how do we get them to buy into it? How do we get people to help decide what's important and who gets to be involved? How do we work on like motivation? So I think we did kind of ricochet around for sure, but we really focused on kind of at that individual level. How do we get that engagement?
Okay.
That ring true for others? I think this is really cool. I've not necessarily talked about a learning agenda from this perspective before, from that like individual staff member perspective, which is really a critical voice. And I guess I've been overlooking it a little bit.
I also really like the point I believe Peter made about the trade-off between kind of product and people, like thinking about this entire subject as it's not just coming up with artifacts, although that's important. It is also kind of building that network of people who can learn amongst themselves. Thinking about peer-to-peer learning for me now across missions, but previously across project teams and country teams, like it's a win if they're talking to each other about things, not just if it comes through, right, that headquarters function as you guys were talking about, but trying to get that consistent balance is actually, to be intentional about that. I think that was really helpful, a really helpful comment.
That's something actually that Pascal touched on for me, and I think it's sort of embedded that it's sort of assumed the learning isn't linear necessarily, right? A learning agenda can have a very linear feel to it as a process that you've kind of decided and tasked out. But learning is many loops, spirals. You can pick an image, but it's 3D and over time. And so the nonlinear nature of learning by real people is something to factor in as well, if you want it to stick and get local buy-in.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point.
Yeah,
kind of builds off of what we were just saying too about the connecting people versus building stuff. And like, you know, if it was all linear, this would be so much simpler, right? Because it would just, one thing would build on the next and kind of carry everyone along. But instead it's like, this goes over here and this piece goes over there. And you kind of have to be agile to like, you know, connect those dots.
Yeah.
And we all make our own associations.
I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I would just say we all make our own associations about how things work, right? And our mental models and our approaches. You can't always write that down. So.
Exactly, or plan for it. One of the things I've worried about over time with learning agendas and USAID's push for learning agendas internally and externally is that it feels more frozen. And we're all so smart that we can figure out just the right questions from the beginning, full stop. And I just believe that's just fantasy land. And so like, how do you build in that flex to be able to say, actually, that wasn't the right question, or it doesn't matter anymore. There's this other thing that's popping up, as you said, as you guys were saying, that agility, I think is just super important.
Awesome. Anything else? I think we're probably about to get called back to the main session and wrap up. So we might all get cut off, but anybody else want to share something they felt kind of rose to the top? Anything you're going to walk away from today with? You'll get to type.
I was just going to.
Caitlin,
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that conclusion sort of comes full circle with the point initially about needing to embed these processes or opportunities for learning sort of in every individual that's working on a project or a program, right? And so if you're thinking about moving from people, from deliverables to people, and those people sort of have the space and the capacity and the sort of requirement to incorporate learning into everything that they do, then you don't lose that. You may lose some specific knowledge that came with that individual person, but you don't lose the spirit of learning and knowledge. So that really resonated for
me. Yeah, I like that. And I like that moving from deliverables to people. I might steal that from you. That's a great little phrase. I think there's often such a focus on these like tangible outputs. And like, well, what is this going to look like in the end? And, you know, is it a policy paper? Is it a presentation at an event? Is it, you know, even like a learning agenda can sometimes be considered like this output and deliverable. But the idea that like all of these things, yeah, maybe you do write a paper or talk about it at an event, but that's just one piece along the continuum. That's not the end all be all kind of like, okay, done with that, moving on to the next thing. And this idea that, you know, learning just keeps going. And so maybe you have these offshoots that turn into something that is tangible, but that a lot of it is about the conversations of the networking and the sharing that could be one-to-one, or, you know, in a community of practice or in a team meeting, so many different opportunities. So
it's possible, I'm just realizing it's possible that we need to leave room and that we need to get ourselves back to the plenary.
We can do that.
Because when I did that a minute ago.
Everyone should just leave the room and then you'll go right back to the main room.
Thanks, Michaela. I was beginning to suspect
that.
So good group.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. This has been really